Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they just keep proving every day they had it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty works for you. And this is your host, Tom Navolis. I am absolutely delighted that you are here with me today. We have, as always, more to cover than we're going to be able to get through. And as you well know, we are dual broadcasting. The video will come up after the first program here at 10 a.m. Right after this on Saturday is the way that I always work it, so that you get to hear me on the radio first, and then you could go see my smiling face. And today, hola, oh yes, here we are. If you can see me, I'm like, it is 70 plus balmy degrees. Not really, but, you know, it's warm enough that I got my nice shirt out, and we're wonderfully colored, and I'm having a good time, and we're going to talk about a whole bunch of good stuff. We are going to talk about more of why the insanities are happening all over in governance, not just what's happening in the swamp, which we'll focus on that in a minute, but, you know, more so how it's extensible into all sorts of the political craziness. I mean, Ohio is just coming unglued. When you have, so here's the fun part. So you have Speaker Ryan saying that, you know, he's done in January. He's not going to run, you know, a re-election, and he's stepping down if he is, whatever. You know, Ryan, he's a globalist, Koch brother-owned beast, and he is one of the heads on the Hydra. But, you know, on top of that, we have the Speaker of the House in Ohio who's stepping down under all sorts of interesting allegations. And I'm not going to get into the detail of that, but, ladies and gentlemen, here's the really interesting part. Here is the super interesting part. I mean, if you take and you look at what's happening there, and then go and look at Lieutenant Governor Mary Taylor's tweets, it is just mind-blowing that the person that is running, who is the chief law enforcement officer in the state of Ohio, Mr. Dewine, is taking and running for governor, yet his office has known for several years that there have been issues with the Speaker of the House in Ohio. And to the extent that he has kind of covered up some FBI probes, not into just this case, but into others. So, Ohio, wake up. You know, I don't know, folks in Ohio, just wake up. If you look at the Kasich machine around Mr. Dewine as it's now unfolding, and I really appreciate the Lieutenant Governor for taking and bringing these things out, that it's like, not just because she's running against him, but because this is the way that the underhandedness works in every state. You see, the swamp isn't just in Washington, D.C. You have a swamp wherever it is that people cannot stand on the true values of the founders and take into consideration the moral and virtue that we are supposed to live under as a people, and then how we're supposed to be governed as well as govern. So it's just really interesting to me to be able to see this, hear it, and I think there's going to be a lot more. I was trying to look for the Lieutenant Governor Taylor's feed on this with the excuses. Here you go. I just found a little bit more right on Twitter itself. You know, nice having that technology that you can run back and forth on. But here it is. You know, Mike Dewine needs to come clear. Ohioans deserve to know what's going on in the state by that ranking law enforcement officer who's improperly interfered in an ongoing investigation to protect his own political interest. The best way to do that is if he comes clean by giving a full accountability to the FBI on the impetus and details of a phone call that he had with the Speaker of the House. So, boy, you see, collusion is not necessarily a crime, okay, as we're finding out, and as it is in relationship to all of the insanity around Donald Trump and this Russian collusion stuff. Well, point is that if we're not, again, and I will say it again and emphasize it again, if we are not a moral and virtuous people, then you're never going to have moral and virtuous legislators. You know, it's just not going to be there. So, once again, I am going to call out the churches. Hey, pastors. Hey, church leaders. Hey, deacons. Hey, whoever you are that is in the corporate management of your congregation, because that's what a lot of you are. You're in corporate management because of your 501c3 status that you have not broken yourselves away from and are still succumbing to the lies of that. Guess what? I'm just being honest. Okay, I've been talking about this stuff for over 30 some years, and the bottom line is that the first great awakening stood on those what? Reformation, biblical Reformation truths and principles that understood liberty. You know, I keep saying that I'm going to talk about Althusius, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Kuyper, I'm going to talk about all of these others, I'm going to talk about what happened, Sam Adams in relationship to all of that. Yes, I know, I just haven't had the time to do another midweek, but I'm going to have to commit to that. You know, there's a lot going on with the Tea Party movement again in Ohio. We're doing some really cool things here in Geauga County and in conjunction with Lake County and some of the other counties as well. So, folks, the citizenry has to take ownership of our local first, especially the school boards. My goodness, how messed up our school boards. And our local governance, county governance, and state. So, just as a quick reference, and I'm going to come back at the end of the last segment, but I wanted to remind you that what we're going to start doing on these programs for the rest of this month is to what? I'm going to promote, like I said, I'm going to promote my newest book, From Covenant to the Present Constitution. And for those that are watching, you know, that's what it looks like. And as you can see, it's a nice thick little book. It is 304 pages of detail to the seminar and lecture that I do in this regard. This book explains a lot. It is that the Constitution is what it is in written format, and that's why you see it here, is that it's still written, but it sure has been marked up a whole lot. You know, those for you that are just listening on the radio, on the front of the book and the cover, it shows the Constitution, and it says the present Constitution, and somebody going through everything with a black magic marker lining out various portions of it. Well, that's what's happened. And I talk about that in detail. And you can see the promo, because I'm putting that link to that promo that I've done a few years back, is still valid for the seminars. We haven't updated any of that yet, but it is a good promo and really hits to the point on what is in this book. And, excuse me. And so, you know, I'd like you to go ahead and you can go to Amazon and you can search for either Tom Navolis on there, or you can search for From Covenant to the Present Constitution Workbook, or you can find it also on thebookpatch.com. Or you know what? If you want a signed copy of the book, just email me at tom@samueladamsreturns.com, and I'd be delighted to take and send you a signed copy of the book. It's $20, and if I'm going to ship it back out to you, there's, about $3.75, $4 shipping that goes with that. I just got the 4 signed from Kathy. So that's with that. And, it'll be really interesting if you want that signed copy of the book. So that is some of the stuff that's happening. Ohio, as well as all over. Oh, did you see in the news as well what's happening in Missouri? I think, is it Missouri? Yeah, Missouri, where, you have this former SEAL that is, I'll tell you, I know a lot of SEALs, and this former SEAL is now the governor of the state, but he was indicted by this leftist persecutor, and to the fact that, as somebody said, you can, and Dershowitz is saying it now out there too, you can indict a ham sandwich if you put enough mayonnaise out there, or, whatever, I guess. So the point is this guy got indicted for some kind of pornographic picture of this woman on his cell phone that he threatened to take and reveal because he had an affair with her, and on and on and on it goes. But now, in court testimony, this woman is coming back and saying, well, it was kind of like I had it in a dream that blah, 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 blah. So I think that an author of an article said very well, so all you have to do is dream about a ham sandwich and you can be indicted. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? That our law is system, and that portions of the judicial system are so perverted. And now to come and find out is that that persecutor is under investigation by the FBI for doing this to other people and other stuff. Wow. I'm telling you, the swamp is not just in D.C. You may have the swamp. Well, I know you folks in Maryland. Okay, let's think about it. Carroll County, all of those. I mean, your counties around there, you have the swamp monsters embedded, those that feed off of everything in the national government. So, boy, I'm telling you, you must have thousands of multi-headed monsters, if not the hydras, running around there like crazy. So, Maryland, I feel really bad for you and, everything that goes on in your various counties. And my sister lives there in Maryland, so I hear from her, all of the insanities that you have going on because of the spawning hydra that is in Maryland alone. Then you go over to Northern Virginia, and you go up, down, to New Jersey. You go through that whole eastern seaboard corridor, and then, oh man, forget it when it comes to the left coast. Oregon and Washington, especially the coastal areas, are, man, off the charts, nothing but swamp. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot to understand, once again, about founders' intent. That's why I am asking you to take and get a hold of me, because what we want to do is we want to launch the seminars in June and start scheduling up for June and into July and, further throughout the rest of the year on what this is that I'm talking about, from covenant to the present Constitution, because it unwraps all of that for you. And in addition to that, it works with all of our other friends out there that are teaching constitutional classes and teaching you the fundamentals of the Constitution, which everyone needs to know and be aware of, and what those principles are. But we also need to come up with solutions in, redeveloping and asserting our liberty under constitutionalism. And that's a lot of what I talk about. So, as we take and we get ready to move into the next segment, we're going to keep revisiting a bit on this. We'll talk a little bit more about that local swamp. But what I want to get into as well is what was going on at the beginning of the nation with the Anti-Federalists and the state conventions, when they were going, whoa, time out. This Constitution has problems. And we're seeing that today. The Anti-Federalists were absolutely right. And Samuel Adams, he is going to come back in the next segment, returning right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty works for you. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back again to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns, those anti-federalists. Yes, they did, and we're seeing more and more every day. They absolutely got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty is working for you when you apply the truths that we all talk about all over this network. And, getting involved with it, taking in, getting in touch with the other hosts and hostesses, listening to the live programming that's on during the week within the various markets, especially in that Maryland market. And most of all is what I appreciate is that when I hear that you, the listener, this being a listener-funded network, you, the listener, is checking all of that out and going in there and you're hitting that donate button and you're donating whatever you can to keep this network alive and the programming going, because it's vital, absolutely vital to our liberties that we have the multiple voices and truth that is broadcast here on Liberty Works Radio Network. Now, and definitely at Samuel Adams Returns. So, you can look at the archives, and I keep forgetting to tell you guys that, is that the archives are at samueladamsreturns.net. And you can find the book and all of the other things going on with Samuel Adams at samueladamsreturns.com. And there's links on each of those that kind of point one another to the other one. We're doing more blogging on there again. We're updating from old Samuel Adams WordPress blog site to the website. So there's a number of years of blogs that we're moving over, and we just don't want to dump them in there. I'm kind of putting them back in date order, going all the way back to somewhere around, I think, 2011 maybe, I think is when. Yeah, it's back 2011, 2012, and all the way forward. So you'll see those at samueladamsreturns.com. And then we're putting some more relevant, real-time messaging, blogging at the samueladamsreturns.net. So with that, I said in the last segment as we were closing out, and as I say at the beginning and every time, is the Anti-Federalists got it right. So as many of you who studied the Constitution and the constitutional conventions, clearly understand that what came out of the Convention of 87, there were some that were happy with, there were some that weren't happy with, and the fact and reality is that all of what was in that report, that Constitution that came out of the Convention in 87, and that was then sent to where? It was sent to the existing Continental Congress under the Articles of Confederation for release to the states to do what? For the states to come into convention so that they could ratify it. Now, the states have had to make a number of changes, even in their own constitutions, to be able to ratify that federal constitution, which did what? It drove the states to elect delegates, local delegates, to go to the state conventions and go through everything that they needed to, from a point of concern as much as a point of adoption. Out of all of that, I mean, there were some heated things going back and forth. It wasn't just those public writings that we call the Federalist Papers and the Anti-Federalist Papers. No. If you really want to get into the meat of what it is in Founders' intent, at this point, I want to take and kind of wrap around a little bit more my definition. Founders, I say, are people prior to the completion of the revolution. Okay, prior to the revolution. That would be where Sam Adams and all of his peers were during those Congresses, as well as the implementation of the Articles of Confederation. That's the founders, okay? The framers were those that were seated at the Philadelphia Convention in '87, and they framed up the Constitution, as I talk about in the book, as you can see from Dr. Kimber's seminars, which I do as well on all of that. But more importantly is then after that, the real builders, those that solidified the Constitution in context for operation, were every person that went to their state convention and contributed in all of those different voicing of opinion, either for or against. So the real battle of the pro-Constitution, because remember, the Federalists stole the name Federalist from the real Federalists, who became known as the Anti-Federalist. So they stole that moniker, but that factions, those two factions, were at every state level. And every state was going to have to make decisions to modify their state constitutions in such a way to be able to adapt that federal constitution for ratification and accept it. So it had to be the people. Always back to we the people. So when we start looking at that, just about every one of the states came back with amendments. They absolutely felt that there was no Bill of Rights, number one, and I know, you heard Hamilton and all of that, and the others in the so-called Federalist Papers that argued that you really don't need a Bill of Rights. Why are you even thinking about that? Well, now we know. Again, the Anti-Federalists, if you will, were absolutely correct, because here we are, in 2018, fighting and having division in our nation over what? The Bill of Rights. The Bill of Rights. What is the First Amendment? What's our freedom of religion, our freedom of speech? Is it perverted by what is happening out of the progressive, socialist, communist, humanist movement? Is perverting the First Amendment? Absolutely. And with all of these news things, I don't even call them programs, absolute perversions of what media and news is supposed to be about. So there's that. And then, obviously, we're seeing the total attack on the Second Amendment because they don't understand what it's all about. Well, anyway, we can go through all of them. And, oh yeah, and just what happened this, week and what we see on the raid of Michael's Cohen's office. I had to look over at Kath because, I always forget the Cohen. Michael Cohen's office is that, to me, when I look at what happened there, that is in so many ways, when we dig in, and we're not going to have time to dig in to the very fundamentals of what the Fourth Amendment is all about, my goodness, Mueller and team and the FBI have just, and the Supreme Court has, by some other court decisions, have just totally destroyed the Fourth Amendment. And then you got these guys running around that are calling for a convention of states. Well, I'll tell you what, it's dumb. I believe in Article 5, but what they're trying to do it with, come on. It's like, give me a break. That's been tried before over and over, and even though they're so close, it is the wrong time, because as I will always continue to say, at this point in history, we do not have an educated electorate sufficient to understand what that's all about. And some people go, well, they don't need to, as long as the legislatures do, and they understand, and they're smart enough. No, the legislators aren't even smart enough. They're pretty stupid, especially when you, and anyway, let's, I'm not even going to get into all of that. Well, let's take a quick look at some of these. I have them all marked up in my handy dandy little markup. Enjoying that. I'm getting down to the 5-minute mark here in this, but this is my Anti-Federalist Papers and the Constitutional Convention debate. And when we start digging into this, it looks at what in the world is going on with all of these amendments. Ladies and gentlemen, there were a potload of them. What? Now, I'm not going to give you the exact number. I'll let you guess. And you know what? Come on, tell me back what the answer is. There were over 100. 100 and what? What was the original submission number? But when we look at that, we can see that Massachusetts alone, let's see, they did 5 submissions that were pretty interesting. I think we'll focus on those real quick. We'll kind of go through them. That in convention, first thing they talked about is that be explicitly declared that all powers not expressly delegated by the aforesaid Constitution are reserved to the several states to be by them exercised. And you have to understand the states are made up of the people. So you can go ahead and let's talk about the 9th and 10th Amendments and see if that kind of flows together. Secondly, that there shall be 1 representative to every 30,000 persons according to the censuses mentioned in the Constitution until the whole number of representatives amounts to 200. Well, that's changed, so on and so forth, to where we have 400 and some. And to that extent, I always say we still don't have enough, because when you have 1.3 million people being represented by one person, are you really being represented? All right. Same question, same issue they had. What's proper representation? You see, they saw that number as such. Anyway, we're not going to get into the technology on why we could have more representatives. We'll leave that one for somebody else to discuss. Fourth, that Congress do not lay direct taxes, but when the monies arising from the impost and excise are insufficient for the public exegesis, nor then until Congress shall have first made a requisition upon the states to assess levy and pay their respective portions of such requisition agreeably to the central fixed in the said Constitution. Now, the census fixed in the said Constitution, in such a way and manner as the legislature of the state shall think best, and in such case in any state shall neglect or refuse to pay any portion pursuant to such requisition, then Congress may assess and levy such states proportion together with interest thereupon at the rate of 6% per annum. That's pretty heavy for back in that day, 6% per annum. Whew! Anyway, so when it comes to taxation, this income tax and all of that, they were proposing a better way of doing it. Several of them have done that. Fifthly, that Congress erect no company of merchants with exclusive advantages of commerce. My goodness gracious. Zuckerberg and all of the others, and the military-industrial complex, and on, the masters of the Silicon Valley, and on it goes. So, wait, whoa. Well, that one never got in. Geez, I wonder why. Had a lot of merchants even back then. So that was the fifth one, that Massachusetts Congress erect no company of merchants with exclusive advantage of commerce. Psh, we saw that one shoot out the door, especially during, the FDR days. Anyway, sixthly, that no person shall be tried for any crime by which he may incur an infamous punishment or loss of life until he first indicted by grand jury, except in such cases as may arise in the government regulations of land and naval forces. Seventh, that the Supreme Judicial Federal Court shall have no jurisdiction of cause between citizens of different states unless the matter is disputed, whether in concerns the reality or personality be of the value of $3,000 or more, and so on. So, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot there that did get somehow mixed into language for the Bill of Rights and what we call the Bill of Rights in those first 10 amendments, and then some of it even extended into 11 and 12, which becomes that framing. But the point is here is that when you listen to that language and then you go and you understand that language based on what was going on in those convention debates, that's where you find out where intent is and what the people have always expected how we should be governed. So yes, can we establish intent? Absolutely. Do we hear it followed? No. So we'll come back in the next segment and talk about that some more when Samuel Adams returns, because those anti-federalists, they got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. And yes, we are at Liberty Works Radio Network, and you can find the archives at samueladamsreturns.net and all the good stuff at samueladamsreturns.com. And we're having some fun. We're getting back into that idea that, yes, there is original intent. And, you know, it really gets down to when you common sense governance from moral positioning. You know, one of the things I forgot to grab, it's a book I have upstairs in the office, is that on They Preach Liberty. I've read from that to you before, and I was going to read a couple other things from it as well today, but I forgot to bring it down when I was gathering up all my goods for the program, and that was one of the things that kind of slipped out of its my placeholder, if you will, and didn't get it down here into that. But let's look at some of the things that, Virginia, and as you well know, Patrick Henry, he was livid with the way that the Constitution came about and how the preamble ended up getting structured in such a way that it used the states instead and we the people, even though we know from a simple terminology is the states were made up of the people. But Henry was really upset with the fact that it was explicitly used in the preamble that we the people and not we the states. And as we've talked before, and if you want to talk about that some more, get in contact with me, but the rationale for that is very, very important, especially as we look at the misuse of language, especially in the 20th and 21st century, where the federal government thinks they own all we the people. And they don't. We still have this thing called a republic, which operates under the functions of federalism. And that's where, at some point in time, I hope to talk about Althusius as that great reformer. And he was one of the first to write about what? Federalism. What does that mean? All the way into the family. All the way into the family. What does a federal family look like? What does that mean? And it all goes back to, some of the things I discovered, and I got to jump on this one before I get into Virginia a little bit more. One of the things I'm interested in, and I don't want to do it just as a academic exercise. But I think the value proposition in relating to you, and you know what, I'd like your feedback on this, but in relating to you, the citizenry, the listening audience here in particular, is that Samuel Adams almost verbatim, yes, because Samuel Adams could read and write Latin, he almost verbatim used the words of Althusius in a lot of his writings. I mean, he understood all of Roman literature, Greek literature. He could read, write in Greek as well as in Latin. He could read also in French, which wasn't really one of his happy preferred languages. He knew some German. He was kind of like a multilingual dude when it came to reading and writing. I don't know, my Latin is really, really rusty, so it takes me, I struggle with it anymore, and my Greek was always very poor, and my Hebrew, I haven't touched that in a long time. But the point being is that Althusius wrote in Latin, and Sam Adams knew it, so he could extract those fundamental principles. And you know what? The whole thing with Althusius is the fundamental root of those principles was biblically sound. So when I look at how Sam Adams got that moniker as the last Puritan, I can understand even more now than ever before as I'm reading Sam Adams in one hand and Althusius in the other, and I sit there and I go, well, I'm not seeing a whole lot different between the two of them. This is almost word for word, when you look at it from a translated perspective. Very interesting. So I don't want that just to be an academic play. I mean, Kath and I have talked about that. It has to be something that's going to be meaningful and valuable to you for action, that you know the truth, the principles, and you know the moral value and virtue by what we're supposed to live. And especially, as I always say, you guys that stand up at the pulpits, preachers, teachers, and yes, all of you, what are they called? Elders and deacons and, mostly corporate managers, because you don't understand really what the job is when you're an elder and a deacon. Anyway, Virginia proposed a potload. I mean, it was a bag load. It was like Virginia decided they were going to do a wagon load. All right, I'm not going to cover them all. But a wagon load, man. I'm telling you, a wagon load of proposed additions to the Constitution for a Bill of Rights. If Virginia had its way, we wouldn't have just 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights. Theirs was like, okay, let's take the top 20. So I'm not going to have time to get through all of them because some of them are similar to that which Massachusetts and Connecticut and, a number of the other states brought forward. But I thought that, Virginia kind of took the lead in some of this, and I really appreciate what they did. Here, first one, that there are certain natural rights of which men, when they form a social compact, cannot deprive or divest their posterity, among which are the enjoyment of life and liberty, with the means of acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and pursuing and obtaining happiness and safety. Woo! Whoa! We could spend the rest of 2 weeks just talking about that first one alone. You talk about intent. You talk about everything that just draws to the whole essence of what we are as Americans. You talk about the biblical concepts, the Althusian concepts, the Samuel Adams concepts and principles of government and governance. Boy, a lot of that's wrapped up right there just in this first proposed amendment by Virginia. Oh, wow. That's a wagon load unto itself, let alone the rest of them. All right, we'll skip on a little bit here. Number 2, that all power is naturally invested in and consequently derived from the people. That magistrates, therefore, are their trustees and agents at all times amenable to them. Ladies and gentlemen, I took and I stopped the way I did because, you know what? That's punctuation. Punctuation. That's something I don't think, even with the lawyers, they teach all that much nowadays, except, to take and manipulate words in law. So when you take, and if you are an honest attorney, if you're an honest person that understands these truths, then what you look at is the punctuation and what that means. And the whole idea is that everything is derived from we the people, and the magistrates are our trustees and agents. That goes to what I talked about a number of programs before and continue to talk about is what? It is on the lesser magistrate, a doctrine. That's a church doctrine. That's a biblical doctrine of the lesser magistrate and what they're supposed to be, do, and all of that before God, and then as they take and they act as our agents for us. Well, it takes me right back into segue, quite frankly. We're not going to get to the other 18 out of Virginia today, and we're going to talk about a little bit more how these ideas and principles and the Constitution itself is taken apart. Taken apart. It goes from when you make a compact is a covenant. A compact, get that. A compact is a covenant. And I talk about that once again, and I'm showing it to the audience here on the YouTube channel, is that it is in From Covenant to the Present Constitution workbook and in the seminar that I do. I'm just reminding you, so some people keep talking about, why is it, Tom, that you're always promoting your book or you're promoting your stuff? Well, wait a minute. So the bottom line is that, yes, if you don't self-promote and you don't advertise yourself on especially the radio network, and then what that means in trying to get the book out, the seminars out, and the information out, I do have to promote myself. So in these last 5 minutes, what I really like to do is just kind of give you the back of the book. I just want to go over that just with you for a moment. So when you take and get the book and you order the book, either from myself on Amazon or at the book patch, you'll can see in the back of the book, it says, the foundational words of the Constitution have not changed, but the present implementation is not what the founders intended. We tell the elected and the bureaucrats to stand on the Constitution. Well, they are doing exactly that. In fact, you telling them to do that gives them permission to fully act according to every aspect of what is presently allowed under the Constitution as it is. This workbook is a culmination of 10 years of presenting the lecture that discusses two constitutions that really begins with that understanding of covenant. That's where it all starts, folks. It starts with covenant. Our founders and the framers of our form of governance understood history back into the ancients such that the relationship of the governing to the governed is established with covenant fully understood. No different than the kings of England breaking covenantal charters with the colonies. How is it that those presently elected to office, appointed to the courts, and hired into the bureaucracies have broken covenantal constitutionalism with the citizens and states in the Republic of these United States? This highly documented workbook takes you through the questions and answers as to why the elected and appointed do freely act contrary to what many believe is the American DNA of constitutionalism. This is the detailed referenced complement to the presentation lecture that moves at a very fast pace through Founders' original intent, the corruption of that intent, the present confusion of the document called the Constitution, and how it is actually being used to govern the nation. Lastly, our recommendations as to what we as individuals and as the body politic can and should do to turn to that which our founders and framers envisioned for a free and prosperous people in this republic of these United States. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what is important right now. What we're seeing over and over is the way in which those that want to pervert our form of government and turn us into a socialistic government in many ways have already done so by taking and looking at what we'll talk about next week a little bit more, because as I said, this whole month of April we are going to be talking about various things and also promoting the book. And we have seen all of those various aspects that have changed how the Constitution is implemented. Once again, the document itself, the fundamental document, has not changed. But what has become corrupted is how it has been and is being implemented this very day, except for those few, those very, very few that are there fighting for our form of true constitutionalism. Ladies and gentlemen, the challenge then becomes for each and every one of us that we take and understand the truth, the very basics and fundamentals, starting with covenant and moving to how did the founders intend the Constitution to be implemented for our posterity. And that's where, yes, those anti-federalists absolutely come in. Sam Adams and the anti-federalists spoke about it, and we talked about the anti-federalists regularly on this program. And more importantly is what we need to do today. What is it that we need to be engaged in? How should we be engaged? What is important for us to do? What I always say, what? Get our feet on the streets and our butts out of our seats. So come on back next week when we talk more about Samuel Adams and the Anti-Federalists, because they absolutely got it right.